Welcome to Awaken the Mind,
Relax.
the NLP and Hypnosis Guide, hosted by Davidyouhas.
You need to understand. If you can't, you must. And if
You're listening to Awaken the Mind, the NLP and Hypnosis Guide, a podcast that inspires the curious to the professional to discover meaningful content and pursue their passions. My name is davidyouhas, and I'm a master NLP practitioner and hypnotist, best known for losing over 100 pounds and running 6 marathons in 2 years. And I'm sitting down with hypnotists, NLP practitioners, and coaches to talk about their process, the lessons they've learned, and how to make an impact in the lives of others. Our guest today is Gary Chappell. His name does not show up in the headline news. He's not considered a guru, yet few people on the planet have touched the lives of so many other human beings. His efforts have helped give birth to countless spiritual, self-help, and financial gurus. Chappell has a knack for identifying diamonds in the rough, polishing them up, and putting them on the center stage to change people's lives for good. An endorsement and joint venture with this man is considered the pinnacle of success by many up-and-coming gurus. He has worked with Anthony Robbins, Brian Tracy, Dennis Waitley, Joe Vitale, Deepak Chopra, Marianne Williamson, Robert Kiyosaki, Earl Nightingale, and many, many others in the self-help and personal development fields. Many can trace their quantum leaps to the day they connected with this man. His name is Gary Chappell, and he is the recently retired CEO of Nightingale Conant. Nightingale Conant, which was founded in 1960, is known as the world's largest publisher of self-help and career-building information in the form of CDs, video, and digital downloads. We really target commuters, people who can use that downtime to educate themselves to further a career, Chappell said. We teach people critical success skills they don't learn in universities. Retiring isn't in Chappell's DNA, as he says it. Why would anyone ever quit changing lives for the better? Chappell feels his greatest opportunity to help others lies ahead since he's begun working with the Napoleon Hill Foundation. Almost everyone he has worked with refers back to Napoleon Hill and his remarkable body of work. Chappell feels there's no better wealth building information out there than Napoleon Hill's. yourrighttoberich.com is dedicated to sharing the life-changing content of Napoleon Hill with people worldwide. Our easy-to-access and use information is designed to provide step-by-step methods for wealth building and life enrichment. If your desire is to have wealth, prosperity, and a strong sense of accomplishment and contribution in your life, then my assignment is to help you get there. I am here to help you receive the full benefit from the life-changing content that was started by Andrew Carnegie and finished by Napoleon Hill. Please give a warm welcome to Gary Chappell. Our interview today has the intention to get to know Gary, gain valuable knowledge with wisdom from his life experiences. Gary is a seasoned mentor in the self-development and life-changing skills areas of life. And now, let's jump right into getting to know you, Gary. Tell me more about yourself growing up.
The short answer to that very good question is I had a very disjointed education while I was growing up. My father worked for a large corporation, and they were an oil logging company when my dad started work, and he was constantly transferred. So my life went like this. I was born in Wichita, Kansas, and at 6 months I moved to Regina, Saskatchewan. Then at 3 years old, Edmonton, Alberta. Then starting the third grade, I moved to Oklahoma City. Then starting in sixth grade, I moved to Shreveport, Louisiana. I left Shreveport halfway through ninth grade to move to Houston, Texas, and then I started 11th grade in Sarasota, Florida. It was in Florida that I really anchored myself. My father was transferred one more time to New York City, and my mother and the whole family, we just fell in love with Sarasota. So we stayed while my dad commuted, and that was tough on him. But that whole process really gave me a disjointed education, and it gave me very low self-esteem. So many people gauge their worth on what kind of grades they made in school, and I always kind of considered myself I wouldn't say dumb, but I certainly never felt like I was one of the smart kids. It wasn't until I started work for Nightingale Conant that I realized not only was I smart, but I was a tremendous problem solver. So that's pretty much the bulk of my growing up. However, I grew up with 6 brothers and sisters, 3 boys and 4 girls, and just like most families, we squabbled, but ultimately my brothers and sisters were my best friends, and they still are today. We're a very close family. My mom was the anchor for us. She was a very small woman, but she was larger than life. She taught us our morals and instilled a real sense of unity in the family and everyone around us, and I'm forever grateful for that. My dad was a mechanical engineer, and he was the one that instilled problem solving. He was a professional manager, and his motto was get the job done with the resources on hand. And I always respected that. That's how he was so successful as a manager. Every transfer was a promotion for him. And he was gone a lot because he worked a lot. He was, left early in the morning and came home late at night. One of my great memories was he came home one day when we lived in Oklahoma City driving a Model T pickup truck. He had gone out and bought this truck, and the whole family, and I was too young at that time to help, but my older brothers helped him fix that thing up, and they put benches in the back, and he painted it pink of all colors. And we used to tool around town in that thing, and he actually taught me how to drive it. So I learned how to drive when I was 9 years old. My legs were too short to reach the pedals, so he had a little mechanism on the pedals, wooden blocks that would extend the pedal so I could reach it with my foot. It was a great car to learn how to drive. It had a spark. It was not a hand crank. It had an electric starter, so it was a little later version of a Model T. But it had a stick shift, and it was really fun. And then probably a year later, 10 years old, I was a real pro. We had good friends that lived in the countryside, and they had a 3-on-the-tree stick shift, an old Ford, and the parents would just let us take it and tool around the dirt roads and the property and the countryside in that car, and it was a real joy. So learned how to drive at a very young age. So anyway, I felt I had a very wonderful upbringing. I was able to master some social skills because we move so much. When you're young and you have classmates and you make a mistake, you fall down in a race, or you do something that's embarrassing, sometimes kids label you, and they'll laugh at you and label you. And so every time I moved, I was able to make sure I never repeated those mistakes, and I was able to develop the ability to quickly make friends, and had a social education that I felt was superior, but a schooling education that was inferior. And that was pretty much my upbringing. But like I say, I'm still working on growing up. It is a lifelong journey, and one that when you approach it with an open and eager mind, it becomes a real joyride.
What careers have you had in your lifetime?
What kind of careers have I had? Well, I've only had one real career, and that was when I started work for Nightingale Conant. So I have to tell you about the jobs I had. I started working at 10 years old. I started as a babysitter, and for many years I worked every single weekend. Probably at 12 I had a paper route and did babysitting. In my teens I was a fry cook and a dishwasher, and I had a few other miscellaneous jobs. When I got out of college, I took up the drums, and I just was enamored with that. And I quickly got into a band, and I was really passionate about that, so I kind of put my career on hold as I tried to pursue a musical career, and ended up enjoying my entire 20s. And I think that was one of the great blessings of my life. I was in Sarasota, Florida, where I met some great people. I still have very strong bonds with my friends there, and I have a brother and sister who live there. At one point, I needed a car, and my brother had found a station wagon in the newspaper, And so I went to go see the car, and it turned out to be a carpenter who was retiring. And he was selling his car, but it was a package deal. You also had to buy all his tools with it. So for $600, I ended up buying this old Rambler station wagon, which I just loved. It was a great car. And I bought all his tools. So I kind of inherited being a carpenter. I had the tools. I figured, well, I might as well learn how to use them. So as I drummed in various bands through my 20s, I developed the skills of a carpenter. So I was pretty much a handyman slash musician. By the time I was 30 years old, I was playing music every weekend, and I was a handyman during the day. I was living in a tree house, and it was not the fancy tree houses you see on TV. This was a big, huge oak tree with some 2x4s nailed to the trunk, and you climbed about 20 feet up to a plywood platform with no rails where I pitched a dome tent. And I lived up there for about 6 months. I would come home at night after the gigs we played and around 4 a.m. and I would scramble up those 2x4s. And one night a big storm hit and that tree started swaying to a huge degree. I thought my dome tent was going to slide off. It was very aggressive. And the next morning I decided, I need a change in my life. While in my 20s I loved doing what I was doing, when I hit 30 and I was tossed about like a rag doll in a swaying tree, I realized, okay, my career is going nowhere. I am ready for a change. And 2 weeks later, I decided to come to Chicago for Christmas, where some of my family lived, and we were all converging up there to do a little family reunion Christmas. Again, I have a lot of brothers and sisters, and so we all converged on Chicago. Now, I didn't have a coat. I lived in Florida. I didn't need one, and when I arrived in Chicago, it was a wind chill of 60 below. So my notion of going to see blues bands in downtown Chicago was voided, and I ended up asking my brother to put me to work. Now, he was working on remodeling Nightingale Conant, and so I came in for 1 week and I started helping build the new studio. Nightingale had previously outsourced all their manufacturing, but they were booming and growing so much that they decided to bring all that in-house, including the recording of all the authors and that type of thing. And so, because I'm a musician, I had a Walkman wherever I went, and it was a cassette at that time. And I asked the gentleman that was responsible for the studio if I could listen to their best-selling program. And so I popped in a program called The Psychology of Winning by Dennis Waitley. And I heard things I had never heard before about goal setting and self-esteem and self-image and some of these psychological concepts that just were new to me. And it literally flipped a switch in my mind, and I just was enamored with Nightingale Conant. And that manager who was responsible for the studio and the manufacturing offered me a job, so I took it. I didn't even ask how much money I would be making. I just said yes. And so I started at Nightingale in manufacturing, and because of what I learned from my father about problem solving, I was never a complainer. When we started the manufacturing facility in Nightingale, naturally we would come across a lot of problems, and I would figure out how to solve those problems. I was quickly given an assistant manager job, and I just felt like I owned Nightingale Conant. I genuinely loved it. I loved working for Lloyd Conant, who was just the most amazing man. And his son, Vic Conant, is quite amazing as well. And anyway, I just was so grateful. I started in the manufacturing. I went on to become a producer. Ultimately, I ended up in marketing, and I left the company for a while, moved back to Florida to start my own company. My wife and I had been trying to have a child, and with no luck, and so we figured, well, let's go start our own little business. And a week after we got into town, we discovered she was pregnant, and she comes from a family of 8 kids, and 12 months after we moved to Sarasota, she was staying home every day with the baby, and I was having to run the business all by myself, and she was lonely and missed her family and said, Gary, I really want to go home. And so we packed up and moved back to Chicago, and Nightingale Conant, they reached out to me and asked me if I'd come back to work for them, and so I did. I took over a portion of the marketing responsibilities and ultimately was the marketing director, and then went on to become the chief operating officer and finally the CEO. So that's my career. I had so many wonderful lessons along the way. I couldn't have been more blessed, and I'm still blessed today to have such a great relationship with Vic Conant and many of the authors from Nightingale Conant, and more importantly, the education I gained from that whole process.
What are some of the most impactful lessons you've experienced in your lifetime?
I learned so many lessons along the way. Before I began work at Nightingale Conant, I came across a book that taught me about the importance of forgiveness. I have to say that when I am asked what's the most valuable lesson I've ever learned in my life, I respond by saying, master forgiveness. To me, it's not a religious thing or even a spiritual thing. It is a psychological tool. More precisely, I believe it's the most powerful psychological tool at our disposal. Forgiveness and non-judgment go hand in hand. You use forgiveness to release yourself from past grievances, and you use non-judgment to keep yourself from having to forgive in the future. But when I first learned forgiveness, this is the analogy I have. Judgment is like carrying a big bag with you. And every time someone crosses you or wrongs you, or you perceive that to have happened, it's like leaning down and picking up a big rock and putting it in that bag and then slinging it over your shoulder. And then someone else comes along or some situation arises, and you collect these grievances that are like rocks. When you don't use forgiveness, that bag of rocks builds up and it weighs you down, and it can ultimately crush you. And what forgiveness does, it allows you to literally drop that bag of rocks and release all that weight from your shoulders. And it's very freeing. So when I talk about forgiveness, you're not doing that to let somebody off the hook. You're doing it for yourself. You're not judging people. You're letting go of the past. You're letting go of all the grievances you've held on to. And when I learned to practice forgiveness on a daily basis, it really changed the way I thought. And it wasn't too long before I moved out of that treehouse that I had learned about forgiveness. It was probably maybe a year and a half, something like that. And it took me that long to really embrace the concept of forgiveness and non-judgment. But without question, it has been the most helpful tool I've ever come across, because it allowed me to let go of any preconceived notion about my intelligence, my flaws as an individual, as well as those of my family and friends and acquaintances. And that created better bonds in my relationships. My relationships grew stronger. And anytime I came across someone new, they never sensed that judgment from me. Now, I'm not saying I was perfect at it, and I still come across occasions where I catch myself judging. But on the whole, it really helped me master relationship and just cleared all the clutter that slowed me down and slows people down. So first and foremost, I have to say that one of the most important things that helped my career was learning to master forgiveness and non-judgment. And it took me many years to work on it, but I was determined to do it because I immediately felt the emotional impact of forgiving and non-judgment. Other things that I learned in my career certainly were time management at the early point in my career, and I always took on as much as I could possibly handle. And I found myself at one point having too many responsibilities. And I came across a program called the Franklin Planner, which was not a Nightingale Conant program, but it was a couple cassettes and a little manual. It was a day planner, and it really taught me about prioritizing my projects. It really breaks down to a very simple process, and that was making a list of all the tasks that needed to be accomplished, and then scoring them with an A, B, or C, A being the most critical things that I had to do, and then making sure that I get the A's taken care of every day. I love computers, I love smartphones, I use them for virtually everything, with the exception of my to-do list. So now my day planner is a pad of paper, and I call it my get-to-do list because I feel grateful to be in a position to get to do things. and I categorize things as an A or a B. I no longer list the C's. I do create a separate list of those, and I try to delegate those. It was a turning point in my career, managing my time properly. The next thing was learning to sell. I think anyone in business, anyone who's serious about getting ahead, needs to become a master salesperson. Whether you actually sell a product or not, you have to learn to sell yourself, sell your ideas. So I think it's very important to master the skill of salesmanship. And in this day and age, I believe a master salesman is somebody that informs people. Nobody wants to be sold, but they love to be informed. And that's the approach I try to take. Again, a turning point was when I learned to sell. There are a couple programs that Nightingale Conant offers that were very helpful for me. One was The Psychology of Selling by Brian Tracy, and the other one is Close the Deal by the Sandler Group. I found those great programs. And then another thing that helped my career was always to utilize my problem-solving skills. I can't remember a time where I was overwhelmed with problems. I was certainly at times anxious about problems, eager to move beyond them. I always sat and thought carefully about how to solve those problems. And that was the next thing that I've used to help me become successful, and that was the practice of meditation. Many famous people have used meditation. Einstein, for example, obviously people like Gandhi, but many successful businessmen and women today, people in politics, people in the arts, they utilize meditation. And really, meditation, again, it's not a spiritual thing, it's a psychological practice. I always do it in the shower in the morning, and I sit in a chair and I let the warm water hit my body, and I clear my mind. And I like to use the phrase, rest your concerns. And that's what I would do in the morning. I would rest all my concerns. I would put them on hold. And when I do that, that allows me to reach a state of peace. When you're in that peaceful space, it's a state where you're not thinking anything. That's the whole goal of meditation, is try to clear your mind of those swirling thoughts that occupy our minds on a daily basis. And so the whole notion is to still your mind, rest your concerns. That's the state of mind where all the answers come. And they always have for me. That's the moment when I have my most creative ideas. I've solved so many problems during my meditations and had so many creative ideas during those meditations that it is a practice I continue to use, and it's one I encourage everybody to use. That's probably about it, other than, read a lot, learn a lot, always be a student, teach what you want to learn. These are all things that I think are very, very helpful.
What were some of the greatest obstacles you faced in your lifetime?
So my biggest obstacles during my career are directly related to my failure to apply forgiveness and non-judgment. I mentioned earlier that my wife and I had moved to Sarasota, Florida to start a business on our own. And I did that because a friend of mine became my boss. And we maintained a friendship for a while, but when he took on his new role, it went to his head. And he started treating a lot of people very poorly. The reason I love Nightingale is because I love the environment. And this gentleman didn't really listen to the programs. He wasn't passionate about the product. He was a marketer, and he thought his role was specifically to sell the product. He didn't need to believe in the product. As a result, he wasn't a very good boss, in my opinion. He was a very smart man and he knew marketing, but he was very hard on people, and he attacked people in meetings, and he would identify individuals as enemies, and he really took the joy out of work for me. And I've always kind of taken the philosophy that, hey, you should love what you do. So I left the company. I did take a week off to carefully consider the pros and cons of leaving. And in retrospect, it was actually a very good thing that I did leave. Of course, had I stayed and had I focused on applying forgiveness and non-judgment, as well as applying the ideas that I'd learned from Nightingale Conant programs, I'm pretty sure I could have helped reshape the way he managed, but that wasn't my role, and that was not a responsibility that was mine. I had higher ups that should have done that, so it just didn't seem like the right thing to do at the time. However, when I came back to Nightingale later on, when I was asked to come back in as a consultant and ultimately get hired, I faced that situation again with another individual. It was exactly the same scenario. He was mean to people in meetings and identified people as enemies. It was kind of amusing to me. And so I really had to address it at that time. By then I was higher up in the organization. I had actually hired this guy. But it was not easy. Applying forgiveness and non-judgment is not always an easy thing, and it does require work and dedication to master it. And so that's why so many people just decide not to deal with it, because it can be such hard work. Really, in terms of obstacles, that was the biggest one. Now, I know that an obstacle any entrepreneur faces, any business owner faces, is customer acquisition and customer retention. I don't care what business you're in. I always encourage people to not go out and invest in a big office and with fancy office equipment and desks and computers. My advice is always to focus on proving the model. Prove that you can put your money and effort into proving you can acquire customers. If you are a new entrepreneur and you're trying to launch a business, figure out what you're going to do to acquire customers. That is the number one responsibility of any company. You have to get paying customers in the door. And, again, if there's any obstacle any organization faces, that's the one. Acquire them, treat them great, and keep them.
Who were your role models growing up?
My role models were people who were great humanitarians, people who had a message. I think that's why I was ultimately drawn to Nightingale Conant. So people like Jesus, who had a very powerful message that endured over time. People like Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. Abraham Lincoln was a role model. Certainly my mom and my dad were role models as well. Again, people that serve mankind.
How did you first learn about Napoleon Hill?
I first learned about Napoleon Hill after I had returned to Nightingale Conant and I became the marketing director. Nightingale had a very unique offer. It was the free trial offer. We would send a promotion to new customers and existing customers, and the customer could place an order. If they liked the program, they would pay the dollar amount that we asked. If they didn't like the program, they would return it to us and owe nothing. So return rates were the best indicator of the quality of the programs we sold. So when I got the role of marketing director, I wanted to do a promotion around our lowest returning program, which in my mind was our best product. That program turned out to be The Science of Personal Achievement by Napoleon Hill. I had certainly heard of Napoleon Hill through the authors that mentioned him. As a matter of fact, almost every author we had referred to Napoleon Hill. So I started listening to the program, and I could see why. It was such a tremendous program, just rich with valuable ideas, helpful ideas. And so I did that very thing. We turned it into a promotion, and ultimately it became one of our best customer acquisition programs. That he'd take on the role of interviewing some of the greatest minds of the era, people like Thomas Edison, Teddy Roosevelt, Harvey Firestone, just so many incredible minds, and compile all that information. Andrew Carnegie insisted that Napoleon not just interview these people and create a course. Andrew insisted that he prove what he compiled actually worked. So it took many, many years for Napoleon Hill to prove the concept. And in the process, he had to constantly refine and work on the course that he compiled. And of course, the rest is history.
How did he get to writing one of the most valuable self-developmental books?
Well, Your Right to Be Rich is an interesting book. It was really the last thing Napoleon Hill published, and it was specifically designed to train individuals to teach Napoleon Hill principles. Napoleon Hill was one of the first people who said, teach what you want to learn. And I can tell you through personal experience that that is absolutely true. If you really want to learn something, teach it. Teaching forces you to dig deep into the content. In order to ingrain a subject in a student's mind, it's important that you understand it completely. That allows you to convey that information in a simple way. So as you teach and you see that students embrace it, you know that you have a very firm understanding of the content. And so again, like Napoleon Hill says, teach what you want to learn. So if you really want to learn something, become a tremendous student and then create a curriculum that allows you to teach it and go out and apply that, teach it. And you'll find when you do, it really ingrains the content in your mind. That's what Your Right to Be Rich does. It helps you internalize Napoleon Hill principles at a level you just don't get any other way.
I read an interesting article on your website that said, doors open when you clear your mind. How are we too busy in the world's drama and not caring for ourselves?
It's very important to learn how to clear your mind. It's a very useful psychological tool. The human mind tends to just be filled with a lot of useless chatter. In this day and age, we're exposed to so many different stimuli that it's really tough to reel in the thoughts that are created because of that stimuli. What I do, I have my own unique way of putting myself in a setting. I'm very much into effective time management, and so my process started around my busy day. I would take a shower early in the morning, and I would literally bring a chair into the shower, and I would aim the warm water at my chest, and I would close my eyes, and I do an exercise that I call resting my concerns. I literally put every concern I have on hold. I don't worry about any of that. I take a few minutes during that period to not think about anything that may concern me. And what that does, that allows me to get into this state of peace. And once you get into that state, for me it takes about 20 minutes, and I'm relatively disciplined at it. So beginners, it can take even longer. And a lot of people say, well, they just don't have the time for that. I can promise you, when you find the time, the rewards are worth it. The whole goal of meditation is to eliminate thoughts entirely. And when you do that, that's the place where inspiration comes. That's the place where creativity comes from. That's where the solutions to problems come. You just find that all of a sudden you're thinking of things that are highly creative and highly effective, and they really are the source of some of the greatest ideas out there. As a matter of fact, you asked about my book Halos, and Halos came out of that meditation. It was a very unique circumstance, as a matter of fact, because I had never had this before, and I have not had it since. I was in my meditation, and just in a flash, I saw a complete concept for a book. I saw the title, Halos. I saw the size and shape of a hardcover book. I knew it needed to be stickman drawings, and it was wordless. And the idea of wordless and stickman was that it would be something that anybody from any language, any country could look at and get the meaning out of it. Halos is about choosing peace. Peace is an option we have in every circumstance. When we are confronted with frustration and anger or other individuals or events who try to turn that anger or frustration against us, we have the option to choose peace. And choosing peace just puts you in a better place, just like meditation does. It puts you in a better place to solve problems, to confront the issues that face you. So that's what Halos is all about. And that's what meditation does for me. And for anybody, quite frankly, it serves as a great breeding ground for creative, helpful thoughts.
Now that you are retired, what is next for you?
Now that I'm retired, what is next? Well, that's a good question. I've been so blessed through my career to be exposed to personal development ideas and meet such great mentors and individuals and authors. The whole industry is so fulfilling. I could never imagine being away from that. The most rewarding thing about being in the personal development industry isn't the income, I was very lucky to receive, but it was the barrage of testimonials that we got daily at Nightingale Conant, for example, of how the programs we published changed lives. So, the way I treat my retirement is I just play things day by day. I did decide to license content from the Napoleon Hill Foundation and offer it on my website, yourrighttoberich.com. And that's been a very rewarding process. I created several free products that I like giving people just because I know they are helpful. I always hope someone will see those and be inspired and come back and buy a product. One of the things I recently started doing was mentoring, and that's how we met. I just wanted to mentor a few people just to get some insights into, how people were thinking these days. I have found that process to be probably the most rewarding thing I've ever done. Mentoring is not coaching. Mentoring is drawing on my rich background to help individuals the best I can, and I do that best by learning about who they are, what their goals are, and then just giving them advice based on that. For the time being, I would like to do more mentoring. I think that's very rewarding. I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. I'll have my meditation tomorrow, and who knows, an idea may come up that shifts focus for me. I take each day at a time. I really enjoy it, and I enjoy sharing great ideas with people like you. So if you want to learn a little more, you can go to yourrighttoberich.com. You can see my book Halos at gethalos.com. I like to say Halos is for kids and wise adults. It's a great gift book, and there you have it. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you and share my history and my thoughts with you. The very best to you.
Thank you for being our guest today, Gary. It is an honor to have you on our program. Check out Gary's website, yourrighttoberich.com, and you can find more of his links and contact information on the Awaken the Mind website. Until next week, thank you for listening.
Thank you for joining us today with Awaken the Mind, hosted by davidyouhas.
Awaken the mind, you need to understand. If you can't, you must, and if you must, you can. Now that I got you, let me put you in a trance. Got you feeling hypnotic, your mind, let me massage it. Your thoughts are getting quiet, your stress subsiding. You starting to see images, but it ain't no mirages. Think it's time to calibrate. Take a breath and concentrate. Get into your subconscious. Time to feel the energy, the brain waves. Let's go deep into your memory. Beware of self, let the worries melt. All you see is you and you don't see no one else. Auditory digital, talking to yourself. It might seem bizarre, a feeling you never felt. This is your time to shine. Awaken the mind, the NLP and hypnosis guide. Yeah.